Chapter 8. Flashes of Blue. It was long past midnight by the time the phone on the bedside table began blaring like a siren, rudely rousing D.I. Glenn Harris from his sound sleep. Begrudgingly turning over on his side, he stared at the perpetrator of his discomfort for a second or two before he answered. "Hey man, have you any idea what time it is?" he said in his well-known Anglo-American accent, currently littered with the hints of sleep. "Very sorry for the lateness, sir, but your presence has been requested at St. Michael's Mount. There's been a shoot-in," replied the familiar voice of the desk sergeant at Penzance Station. "Can't armed response deal with it?" Glenn asked as he pictured the familiar image of the squat, corpulent, red-faced desk sergeant with a bristling toothbrush moustache and wildly curly hair that, try as the sergeant might, always seemed to have a mind of its own, standing behind the desk at the station, moustache now more than likely twitching slightly at even the hint of the idea that Glenn was trying to shirk his duties. Not that he had any intention of this, it was just a little banter he had with the sergeant. Honestly, these young'uns today, just no work in 'em. Especially these tall, dark, handsome types. Always wanting their beauty sleep. Come on, sir, get yourself out of bed. No rest for law and order. Armed response have been on the scene for a while. Wouldn't want to show us up now, would ye? Besides, those responsible have long gone by the time they arrived. Point taken, old-timer. Anybody hurt? Yes, sir. Armed response found one body, yet to be formally identified. However, they believe it to be that old Jackson Orban. Still trying to get hold of either the family or an estate worker to make a formal identification. The team also found a large amount of spent ammunition. Looks like a war zone down there, according to reports I have so far. The chief specifically asked for you, so I suggest you get there as fast as ye can. Okay, man. Tell him I'll be there as soon as I can. I suppose there's no rest for the wicked either. See you later, Sergeant. Oh, and Sergeant, there better be some coffee waiting. When there not been. Cheers, man. Catch you in a bit, Glenn replied before hanging up. Who was it? Asked his wife, who had also been awoken by the call. Work, hun. There's been a shooting at the Mount. Sorry, I'm gonna have to go. Do you really have to go? It's not long since you've got to bed. Yeah, hun. Sorry. At least it hasn't woken the little one, he replied, realizing almost immediately as the words left his lips that he'd jinxed it. The loud wails, now clearly emanating from the room next door, signalled that their 8-month-old was now anything but peacefully asleep, and that he was not going to hold back his displeasure. If he was now awake, he was going to make sure that the whole world knew about it. Great. Just what I needed, Glenn said, pulling his socks on, knowing full well that it could take quite some time to settle a little fella back down. Don't worry, Flower. You go. I'll see to him. Aw, thanks, Hunt. You're the best. Hope he isn't up for too long. I'll text you once I've got a better idea of the situation, he said as he slipped his favourite 3/4 length tweed overcoat on. Take care. You always know I worry about you when guns are involved, his wife said as she kissed him goodbye. I will. Speak to you later. Love you, he replied, with a final loving glance at her before he left the warmth and comfort of their house for the bitter cold crime scene. The sight of his own breath as he stepped out of his front door onto the dark, dreary street sent a shiver straight through him. Although he'd been living in the UK for over 14 years, he'd never quite got used to how cold and damp the late autumnal weather was. He'd been born and spent most of his childhood in Portugal, and even though his mother was from Newcastle upon Tyne and his father was from Cincinnati, both of which were renowned for having cold winters, somehow the ability to deal with the cold hadn't been passed on. The Portuguese temperament and passion had sunk in and left a lasting effect. It didn't take long to make the drive from Penzance to the Mount, and although he had a brief idea of what awaited him, even the call could not have prepared him for the sight he was met with as he drove into what he had always known as a quaint little seaside town. Marazion was awash with the glow of dozens of blue flashing lights, and the streets were packed with an assortment of police units, from d'armed response to dog teams, not to mention the other emergency services. The West End down to the causeway had been completely cordoned off, and due to the state of the tide, they'd even had to call upon the local police patrol boat to ferry services across to the now waterlocked landmark. After being waved through the melee of locals that had all turned out from the comfort of their warm beds, intrigued by the commotion outside, D.I. Harris parked his car as close as he could to the square and walked the last stretch up to where the major serious incident unit had been set up. "Ah, nice to see you at last," D.S. Jones said as he spied Glenn entering the MSI unit. "Hope we didn't disturb anything too important," he continued in a slightly sarcastic tone. "Hey, boss. Not really, apart from the little one." "Oh, sorry about that. How is the little lad?" "He's great. Keeps us on our toes. And, well, sleepless nights are par for the course, especially as he's teething at the moment," Glenn replied, with every corner of his face lighting up with that proud, loving look that only a father has for a newborn son. "Ah, bless the little lad. All have to go through that stage at some point. I remember when our firstborn was at that age, and the endless sleepless nights. Thank God they grow out of it pretty quickly. Glad he's doing well, and trust me, he will eventually start sleeping right through. Right, to business. This is what we know so far. We received a report of gunshots up at the Mount at around about 11:45 this evening. Armed response were immediately deployed and arrived not long after 20 past midnight. However, by the time of their arrival on the scene, the only things they found were a huge amount of spent ammunition, areas of blood spatter, and an unidentified corpse. It was only when one of the local dog handlers turned up that we were able to make an initial identification that it may be Jack St. Aubin. But that has yet to be authenticated. We're still trying to reach the family members. It appears they may be away on holiday, so we may have to rely on one of the estate employees for the time being to make a formal identification. Do we have motive for the killing? Currently, we're feeling in the dark a bit. From the locals we've interviewed so far, the picture we're getting is that he was well liked in the area, did a great deal for the community, and was very well respected. No one has really had a bad word to say about the lad. So we've ruled out a local feud. We know he was seen earlier in the day at the Godolphin Arms Hotel, in the company of what appeared to be a group of friends, 2 men and a woman. They've yet to be located, and the descriptions we have are very generic, so not much use to us at present. There have been reported sightings of a number of strangers in the town yesterday afternoon and evening, as well as a group in boats that seem to be heading towards the Mount, but given the touristic nature of both the town and the Mount, it wouldn't be uncommon. It's a right little brain teaser. A robbery gone wrong? Glenn tentatively proposed, as he thought about the valuables that the family must surely have collected over the centuries. Perhaps. It is certainly something to consider. We'll know a bit more once we've had a thorough search of the buildings and the ground, the DS replied. What would you like me to do first? Get on that patrol boat and go see the area where the body was discovered. See if there's anything that the men in white might have missed. Oh, and Glenn, see if you can get a preliminary from Herzog. You know what that damned pathologist is like. Never likes to preempt the autopsy. Nevertheless, give him a big push. In this particular case, tell him we need all the info we can get right now. If it is Jackson Orbin, you can guarantee that when his father gets back, his lordship will raise all kinds of hell, and we will be looking for answers. So we need to be well up to speed by that point. I'm going to go and interview the local who raised the alarm. You know Jones's Law. 70% of the time, the one that reported it is more than likely responsible. Oh, that's all I need now. Bloody press, the super added, as he spotted a few familiar faces from the local Star and Gazette making their way towards the unit. What are you still doing here? Go, out the back. I'll deal with the vermin. Glenn didn't wait another moment. Turning on his heels, he took to the back stairs out of the mobile unit, with just the hint of a wry smile on his face as he heard the customary, Superintendent, what can you tell us? Can you confirm? Followed by, no comment at this time. Initial stages of inquiry. And when we have a clearer picture, first to know. Knowing full well that the super hated the press, he saw all called wordsmiths as the lowest form. Them and defending QCs, always spinning and misrepresenting the evidence to make a few more bucks.